Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter. Usually, I say with people who matter, and that happens to be anybody who wants to engage in a true dialogue. And today, I don't have a guest, so I'm hopeful that some of you out there who see that I'm live might join and put comments in the chat here so that we can kind of address that together. As you probably know if you follow me at all, I am a ponderer. I'm a thinker. Um, I'm thinking of I don't know, I suppose it was a little essay that I heard many years ago that was something about um, heaven help us if God releases a thinker on the earth or something like that. And so I've had people tell me, why don't you just do stuff? Don't think so much. And I get it. I understand that that is hard for people, and I don't know how not to be that. So I've watched a lot of YouTube videos recently. Um, I've been watching a lot lately, and there's a lot to watch, right? There's a lot to watch on social media because there's a lot of movement, a lot of stuff happening, and this last week has been especially busy, I suppose. There's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of stuff to watch, and if you're on social media at all, you know what I'm talking about. Um, there's just been a lot of opportunities for us to build our discernment muscles. Like, is this true? Is this real? What am I understanding? What am I seeing? What am I feeling? And if we're not great at discerning, it can be really easy to get caught up in whatever has the most hype. And so I'll just kind of back up and talk about what I mean when I talk about discernment. I've come to call that lining up the eyes: intellect, intuition, instinct. The three parts of us that actually help us think and ponder and determine. Our intellect is facts. If we can gather facts and put them in our heads, that's one way. If we can be really in touch with our intuition, which is something that we can't always quantify, but it's a feeling. It's something that I feel like this is the way to go. Intuition, the way Napoleon Hill describes it, is our connection with infinite intelligence, which to me is God. You can call it whatever you might call it, but that to me is what I look at when I think about intuition. And then there's instinct, of course, your gut, your fight, flight, freeze. And I've recently come to understand that there's another way to think about that, and it's called fawning. And when we fawn, we try to appeal to our oppressors in a way that keeps us safe. So, same thing: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the four F's in our instinct. And that's a way to make decisions too. But if we use only one of those, we're not really using all of our resources. So, discernment to me is lining up the eyes before you make an actual decision. Think with your head brain, feel with your heart brain, and be aware, I guess, with your gut brain. And use all three as you discern. And there have been a lot of opportunities to use those muscles this week, just this week. We can talk about just this week. We had a No Kings rally on Saturday all over the world, which was, I guess, a time for people to come together in opposition of what they saw to be potentially a king running America. I get it. I watched. I didn't participate, but I watched. And then there were responses. I would say maybe more reactions to that by people who might have been triggered. I wish there were another word. If there's another word for triggered, I'd love you to help me see what that is. Affected um, by some of what they saw. I don't think too many people who actually participated in any of the rallies over the weekend actually saw what some of the people who were um, fueling the fire actually were saying. Because to me, what I saw and heard from friends who were there, at least one in my local community, was nothing like what the inciting side was trying to say. There were no paid protesters. I mean, I don't think any of this was what it was made out to be by the side who wasn't participating. And that brings me to the reason that I didn't participate. I am feeling in my bones and lately something angsty, something like there needs to be an alternative to what I'm seeing in all of the against language. Again, I'm not judging this. Please hear that I'm not judging this. I'm just sharing what I'm experiencing in my own discernment process. And while I appreciated what I saw and heard from friends who were actually at these rallies, which were very peaceful from what I understand, and again, you can find what you're looking for. So you can find that there were paid people, and you can find that there were, I don't know, you can find what you're looking for. Let's just suffice it to say that. And what I saw was the feeling that I would like to explore more, which is fun, um, being with people of like mind and like heart, perhaps, standing for something while still fighting against. And that's the distinction for me. I wish there were something to stand for without having to protest or resist. Because what I'm experiencing right now, again, only me, is this angst between what I want to feel, what I want instead, and what people are fighting against on either side of, let's just say, political issues. By the way, preface, I know we're not supposed to talk about politics or religion in public, but in my opinion, that's what has gotten us into trouble, because we haven't practiced our ability to talk about difficult subjects. And because they incite so much defensiveness, perhaps, because they tend to be offensive, then we get really good at defending, resisting, pushing against the things we don't want. And I love an opportunity to get better at having conversations about things I prefer instead. And because I haven't had as many public places to do that, I'm not great at that yet. I study it, I read about it, I meditate about it, I call it wonder and ponder about it being this space of determining what I prefer instead. And I have a few friends with whom I can have these kinds of conversations, and there is not a lot. There's not a lot in the, I'll call it the middle, but in the space of finding common ground, whether it's religious or political, in those two areas we're not supposed to talk about. And so I'm here to say today that I am in search of those spaces. I wrote a lot this morning. I tend to do some journaling when I'm I call it I'll call it wonder and ponder. I don't necessarily call it meditating, because that feels like I don't do it right. That hits my perfectionistic tendencies, and I'm like, oh, I don't do that right. So I wonder and ponder. That's what I call it. And what I came up with today, as I was just kind of, I guess, writing about some of my thoughts, I recognize that when people don't have a place to be heard, because we haven't really been good at that, providing listening space for people to speak into, that when they feel a place where they can be heard, they tend to talk a lot. And I did too. I know. I do that here, right? I'm talking. I'm the one talking on this podcast. And so I'm the one saying all the things I'm saying. I prefer dialogue. And just as a reminder, dialogue to me is our willingness to suspend any previous assumptions we might have had before we came together, so that in the space we're creating, we can learn from and with each other. That's my definition of dialogue. And I will always invite dialogue. Debate to me puts me on my heels right up front, and I have to listen differently, because I have to listen to defend and then listen to offend in some ways. I'm not great at debate. I don't love debate. I don't like how I feel watching debate. And even discussion, when you look at business settings, sometimes we'll say we have discussion groups and we get together and discuss things. But discussion comes from the same root as percussion and concussion. And while we may not intend it to be that, the energy around that word is more about the push and the force of the language and the ideas than it is about holding that space open so that people can actually hear and listen and discern. And again, we're not good at this because we haven't had that many opportunities. So I get that when people feel they can take a deep breath and put their shoulders down, they might start really talking. And nothing bad or wrong about that. It's that, you know, that space then doesn't necessarily, at first at least, have a place for people to actually listen to themselves, because they're just getting it out. And I think that's important. I think that's really important. And if we're building that into our safe spaces, we have to remember that the spewing out, it's going to sound gross when I say it like this, but you have to vomit out the bad stuff before you can get anything good in. So venting, as long as we're on purpose about this and we know what we're doing, you got to get it out. You got to speak it out. Get it out into the space so that we can go, okay, I feel better because I just got it out. Now maybe there's more opportunity to listen. And so that's just a space here. If people haven't had that place before, they don't necessarily build their listening skills at that stage because they're still working out what's inside of them. And that's a perfect beginning. So it's like the floodgates are opening because they've been silent for so long because they haven't felt safe. So just know that that's the first. In my, by the way, everything I'm going to say here today is my observation. It has no research, well, a little bit, but no real research. I'm not Brene Brown, who's done a ton of research in this. This is just my thoughts that I'm putting out. And because it's just me talking, thank you to the 4 viewers who are watching. I don't have any opportunity to learn something new in this space right here unless you put a comment, and then I can wonder and ponder about the new information. So that's what I love about dialogue, and yet I still want a space to get things out to. So thank you for that. So I'm wanting personally something different, distinct from a fighting against space, which is what I saw even on Saturday with the No Kings protest, because the No Kings protest was again what we don't want. We don't want kings, and we're going to protest against this. And a lot of the signs were, they had that edge to them. We don't want this thing. And some of them were really funny, and some of them were really clever, and yet they still were a protest, and it was still against something. So I'm just looking for something else, something in addition to, again, not dissing that and not dissing anything. I'm here to talk about what I want instead. So where do people go when they have a longing to be? How about that? A longing to be. They want to belong, right? Belonging is a thing, it's a real thing. So where do we go when we have a longing to let our shoulders down and to just be and to exhale and to not be judged by what we say and not have gotcha bombs thrown at us? And where is that space? I'm not quite sure. I want to believe I'm creating those kinds of spaces, and it's slow, and it's you don't always see the results of those spaces. It's kind of like planting a bamboo seed versus planting a carrot seed. You plant a carrot seed in the ground and you know that in 47 days it's going to become a carrot. And bamboo, I've heard anywhere from 5 to 15 years it takes underground. I don't know the biology of bamboo seeds, but I know it takes a lot longer because a lot's going on underground. And when a bamboo seed shoots through the ground, it grows really fast, which is why it's such a renewable resource. And so ideas can be kind of planted like that in this way. So where do people go when they have this, like, there could be something else? And that could be really scary because it means that I have to rethink what I've believed for so long. And I watched a YouTube video this morning. Maybe it was a Reels video, I don't remember. A college professor who has been teaching college for 20 years, and he was talking about how when people resist college or resist education, it's because they think that education, at college in particular, is there to teach liberal things. Well, the classes themselves are learning. Maybe some are some dialogue classes. I guess they would call them discussion classes. But it's the whole experience of college or of a learning environment that has you actually come up close with people who are different from you. And if you go to a college, let's just say a college, the likelihood that you will meet someone who has a different upbringing, point of view than you do is higher than if you don't. So if that's what we're worried about, that people are going to be exposed to other points of view, other religions, other races, other ideologies, I get how that would be scary. And it could be scary to people who have said, this is the way it is. This is the way we do things around here. And if somebody leaves the village and goes out and learns something else and tries to bring it back home, I can see how that could be really scary. So if people are only ever used to fighting against something that goes against ideology, religious upbringing, politics, I get how that would be scary. And that's why I named this today Evolution or Revolution. Maybe I said revolution or well, we say we want a revolution, right? Go back to the Beatles. We say we want a revolution, and a revolution is great. It's when we recognize something and we revolt against something. That's a revolution, but it revolves, right? It would come back around, and a revolution is something. I'm not even judging it. Yes, okay, revolt, resist, do those things you do, and know that it's going to come back around. And I wonder if the space I'm feeling right now feels more like an evolution than a revolution. And for me, I feel like my thought processes and my feeling, my willingness to discern, I said again, line up the eyes, intellect, intuition, instinct. My own personal process of this feels less like something I want to fight against and more like something I want to grow into. And for me, that's different. And the model, I guess, that I can think about that feels most in alignment with me right now is spiral dynamics. And I know I've talked about it on this podcast before, but that's something I'd really like to do more research into and get more versed in. Spiral dynamics. And it's a human evolutionary process that was developed by Claire W. Graves on a college campus, where he observed people and he asked their opinions of things. Instead of saying, this is the way it is, I'm going to have a hypothesis about something and prove it right or wrong, I think the way he did his research was more about, let's see what can emerge. That feels really good to me right now where I am. It's just a different mentality and energy than fighting against. There's a different vibrational energy to that. So I recognize, and by the way, I'm going to go back and add another dimension to this that I've been studying, which is the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. I know I say it all the time. If you listen to this at all, you're sick of hearing this. But it's that conscious and unconscious way of looking at things, above and below the line. Conscious awareness, conscious leadership is being open, curious, and committed to learning. Unconscious, on the other hand, is closed, defensive, and committed to being right. And when I see that, I can't unsee it. And I observe that in ways, and I notice it for myself. I notice when I get to that space. I have a cat hair in my mouth. The trials of living with cats. Cat hair. Below the line, I recognize when I get closed, defensive, and committed to being right, because I feel it in my jaw, feel it in my shoulders. I don't have fists necessarily, but I feel tight, and I notice. And what I do for myself is box breathing, which is breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold, box. And I did that. I do that often now when I feel, like I've fallen below the line. And so that helps me a lot. And when I see things online or I watch videos or I see what others are posting and I feel like I have FOMO, I have fear of missing out, I know that's a fear, right? It comes from fear of missing out. And fear has a job. I get it. Fear has a job in our human evolutionary process, and it's to keep us safe. It's, if you go back to that, I said head, heart, gut. The gut is there to keep us safe. It doesn't involve our head. It doesn't involve thinking things through. It's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. It's all based on fear. I feel like I'm getting attacked, so I need to defend. That's what happens below the line. It's unconscious. We're not thinking about it. It's unconscious. It's biological. It's what happens when we feel that we're going to be attacked in the wild, right? So there's nothing wrong with any of this. I'm just noticing a lot of things. And when I get triggered, I realize I fall below the line and I take measures to come back above the line. Now, I've been doing a lot of work. I've been doing this personal development work for, I like to say since 2003, because that's when I first had this awareness about things. And that's 22 years. So that means I've done a lot of work. I can't assume that everyone in the whole wide world knows what I know, has studied what I've studied, will take the measures I take to come back above the line. And that's been a process in itself because I sometimes fall into that space where I just assume everybody knows what I know and they don't. So I like to say that as I grow in awareness, I do my best to grow in compassion as well. Not always great at it, but do recognize when I fall below the line. So, and I'm looking over here at my notes because I did write notes this morning. So when others are triggered by my questioning, because I'm doing my best to stay above the line, which is curious, committed to learning, I now will see it differently. I don't take it as personally as I used to when people shut down or ask me to leave or whatever, when they're triggered by my questioning. I used to take it personally. I can think of at least 2, 3 examples in my career where I thought I was being curious and they thought I was being confronting. And I was asked to leave organizations because apparently the questions I asked shed some light on areas they either weren't willing or able to address at the time. And again, this is in hindsight, and I completely could be wrong about this, but that's my perspective. The fact is they didn't stay around long enough for us to have an actual dialogue about it. I would have loved to have said, what just happened here? What was it that I said that caused you to say, no, this might be the time we're going to free you up to do what you really want to do? We didn't get a chance to have a dialogue about it. And part of it is because I wasn't confident enough in what I was experiencing. I really, really did believe I was wrong. I worked at an organization where my job was to recruit people. And my job was to get to know, it was real estate. This is no secret. This is what I was doing for 3 years of my life. And my job was to recruit other real estate agents. And what I did in that process was had coffee with them to get to know them. I mean, not in my mind, that's what I'm doing. I'm there to get to know you, to see if I can tell you a little bit more about our organization and see if that's a fit. That's the way I went into it. That's what I completely understood it to be. And so that was what I did. I'd call people for coffee. And more times than not, they would say no, because I know all you want to do is recruit me. And in my mind, I'm thinking, but I don't even know you. How would I know if it's a fit if we don't know each other? Because my, what could I say? My values, my desires in my own life are connection. I really do desire connection, but connection on a deeper level. And so for me, it was obvious. Well, I'm not going to recruit you if this isn't a good fit for you. Yet they didn't see it that way. So I thought I must be wrong. Oh my gosh. So I got kind of hesitant, but then was told by the organization I worked for at the national level, if you're not telling your story, someone else is telling it for you. And then the story they were telling about me is, Jodee only wants to recruit you, so look out. Don't say yes when she calls you to ask for coffee. And I thought, okay, so I need to tell my story. Somehow I need to find my own story, which is, I don't even really know you. I'd like to know you better so that I could see if there's something we could connect about. And so I did what I could to tell that story, but it wasn't fast enough for the business I was in, which is all about numbers and transactions. And there were other situations that were very similar to this one where my numbers weren't good enough. And so I ended up being a failure at my jobs in a couple of cases because my numbers weren't good enough, because people weren't coming on board as quickly. I mean, they seriously used to say things like, you just go hook 'em. You hook 'em, we'll skin 'em and fry 'em. And I was appalled at that. What? There's nothing that more people won't solve. Numbers, 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 numbers. Just get them all in here. Get numbers. We'll figure it out. My job was to get the numbers. And today I look back and I think, well, no wonder I wasn't good at that. I didn't know at the time that there was another way of thinking of things. I only knew that what I wasn't. I only knew that I was failing. And so that was how I judged myself. Um, so I always thought I was wrong. Now, however many years later, I'm recognizing that I have a lane. I'm developing a lane. I want to stay in my lane. I want to be for something instead of fighting against something. I want to allow ideas and thoughts and creativity to emerge instead of always having an agenda item for everything that needs to happen. And I have not had the language for that. I still don't really have the language for that because I guess what I used to call myself when I first started my business was a trainer. I would do training for organizations, and I think we still call what I do training, and yet it's not necessarily step 1, step 2, step 3, which we need in the world. It's just not what I'm called to do. I'm called to facilitate dialogue that leads us to emergent awarenesses. Wow, I know that sounds really out there, but that's sort of what I am doing. And I think with that lack of language for that, it can feel really woo woo, touchy feely, whatever. I mean, insert your label here. I get that because it's what's the guarantee here? And what I get is we have to be willing to give something up in order to allow something else to emerge, and that's a scary space because especially if it involves our identity, we have to be willing to get rid of the old identity of a teacher or a trainer, a teller of things, and be willing to allow something else to be born into that space. I mean, think about snakes shedding their skin and caterpillars becoming butterflies. All of that is wildly uncomfortable and messy. And human evolution is the same way if you think about it. I mean, if we don't have an identity to go toward, we only know what we're going against. And that's what we find ourselves in right now. We're fighting against what we don't want, but we don't yet know exactly what we do want. And it's messy. Yet, if we don't look at those shadows, if we don't look at that space that is not yet defined with some sort of light, we're all just, at best, stumbling around in the dark. And so I just sense or feel that I'll be the guide. I'll go first. I don't know where I'm going either. Yet I'm taking light from a source that I'm calling, a higher power source. And I'm shining a light so that we together can look at the dark places. And so that's where I struggle with calling it religion and calling it God, but that's what it is to me, even though my religious upbringing was so restrictive and caused a lot of angst for me growing up. I still feel none of that is God's fault. None of that is my creator's fault. It's the way I interpreted it as a human. And so I'm working to bring some sort of light to the dark places. How about that? So I've been meeting with potential coaching and facilitation clients a lot recently, and every single one of them, in my experience, has known that they want more clear communication, conflict resolution, and leadership. Those are the kinds of things that they say they're looking for. They just don't have any idea how to get there, because if they would have gotten there already, right? So they're having conversations with me about some of these things, and I can't make any guarantees, but I'm pretty confident that if we just go together in the way I just described it, that we can make progress. So in one conversation this week, a potential client who, this is only Wednesday, so who actually became a client after our conversation, said to me, as we were talking about communication and leadership, said to me, so who does this well? And I, without even thinking, I said, well, I do. And I heard myself say it, and then I went, oh my gosh, that sounded kind of cocky. But I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I'm going to trust it because I'm not as afraid of going first as I used to be. And so going into that messiness of conflict and ineffective communication, I think if I go in with a a light and dialogue as my guide, I really do believe that when people are put in that space, their own personal wisdom can emerge, even if it's scary. And so I know there's a solution in there somewhere. I just don't know exactly what it is. And that got me thinking about this story about how I know there's a pony in there somewhere. If I can just get through all the horse shit, I can find the pony. And that's kind of how it feels sometimes. I know we're digging around in the dark and we don't know, but there's got to be a pony. And I'm pretty committed to that. What I know is what we fear, we resist without thinking about it, right? What we fear, we resist. And we don't do this consciously, right? It goes back to below the line. It's to keep us safe. And Brene Brown is the one that I've studied the most, who tells us that it's pretty hard to hate people up close. And I think back in my own life, you know, being raised in a really, really, really conservative community of almost everybody who looked exactly like I did. I got to college, my liberal college, and I met people who were different. And until I met a real gay person or a real person of color or a real human being who was trans or all Muslim or Jewish or anything different from me, until I met a living, breathing human, that was just a concept to fear. But as soon as I met these people and had interactions with the actual humans, that changed the way I saw things. And all of the fear-based ways I was raised, I started to question. And as I've told you, it's a long process for me because I thought I was wrong. And what I'm recognizing now is maybe there is another way than the way most of us have been taught and trained and conditioned and programmed to believe. So thank you for allowing me the 31 minutes to just kind of get this out and to talk through this myself. Because as I talk through things, I hear what comes through me as well, and that helps me learn as well. So whether you were here live or later, thank you for being part of the community who is at least somewhat interested in another alternative to fighting against what we don't want. Maybe the revolution is the first part. Maybe we need to revolt. Maybe we need to get things out into the light. And at some point, could we then move from revolution to evolution? I believe it's possible, and I'm willing to go first. So if you want to have more conversations like this around topics like this is what we do in the Enlightened Leadership Lab on Mondays from 4 to 5 Central. I'd love to invite you to take a look at that. I'll put in the notes, I'll put the address where you can get more information. I'm working with some amazing clients coming up now, where I'm facilitating dialogues like this within the organizations so that they can have a better, they can get rid of some of their filters maybe and feel safer to have these kinds of conversations that allow their own wisdom to emerge. And in those spaces, we work on things like leadership, communication, accountability, critical thinking, so that they get rid of the things that keep them from doing their best work. And then the productivity that they're working on, that their companies and organizations are there to produce, gets better and clearer. And that happens as a byproduct of clearing away some of the filters that are in the way in their communication, leadership, personal development, all of those things. That's what I do. So if you want more information about that, I'd love to have a conversation. And as always, everybody, just go find a way to get real this week. Radical, energized, authentic, and learning focused. And then don't be daunted by the word radical. Go back to the original meaning, which is to find the roots. Get to the root of what is true for you. That's what radical really means, getting back to the root. And if you find ways to do that, I'd love to hear about them. So reach out. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.